Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense. Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with Mr. Backwards at Joe LaVacca.
I don't know if I love that one. That's just, come on, man. You can do better than that.
I can? No, I don't know. I'm just looking here. It's pretty swag. Should I call you Mr. Swaggy Joe LaVacca? Is that
there you go. That's a little bit better.
Like that?
That's a little bit
that?
better.
That's actually an adjective, not like just wearing a backwards hat, seeing the obvious.
It's like stating what you see.
I'm gonna have to start pulling up adjectives to describe people before the episode.
I think that would be a nice little thing. It kind of gives viewers a little something to look forward to, like what is, like we are doing the question of the day now, which I really like. What is the adjective of the day? And then maybe we can even challenge listeners to be like, hey, can you use this adjective to describe someone else in your life today?
Well, I'll have to start throwing some negatives one out there so that this way they feel like
you got to keep it balanced.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to have to shit talk you sometimes, Joe.
Well, of course. I mean, we want to look, we're a fair and balanced podcast first and foremost, right? So, throw it out there, especially when I piss you off about something or I don't do something right, I think I deserve a call out every now and then.
All right. Maybe we'll have to go back like last episode and pull out some root words as well and
there you go.
Educate the audience and ourselves because I don't know any root words of anything.
I used to know more because I always liked the fun fact. And when things popped up in conversations with clients, I would be like, oh, well, do you know the root word of diagnoses? It means like best guess based on available information. So even if I was going to tell you what was wrong, it would be a guess.
Philosopher Joe over here.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Now, how do people find us, Joe? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just,
Well, if you're listening to this podcast, you already found us.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair.
But you can also find us on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT for myself and at Strength and Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. This podcast is also on YouTube, Cups of Joe _PT, and on Instagram as well, Beyond Pain Podcast over there. There's the application form if you do want to work with us. So if you need any help, you can fill that out. We are more than happy to help. And if you just want to have a conversation, you can DM us on Instagram. More than happy to do so. Welcome back in, Joe.
Happy to be here. I'm excited for another conversation with you. Looking forward to the weekend. Me and Avery are going to go on a little hike. And I'm sure, hear her bitching and complaining for 2 or 3 hours. And then I'll get her lunch and maybe throw a little ice cream in there. And then the world will be balanced. We were talking about balance, right?
Balance.
I'm going to torture her for 2 or 3 hours. And then, we buy her ice cream. We end on a high note. And then she thinks hiking with dad is fun because there's a reward after it. Right. So, you'll figure this out as, your beautiful daughter Lily gets older and, all the little tricks of the trade to bribe her. But you're pretty good at that already. I've seen you in action for the weekend. You're good at it. You got it going on, man.
We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. She will keep us on our toes. That's for sure.
They all do, man. They all do. And everyone told me girls do it more than boys. You will be one of my go-to sources of information for that fairly soon. But for right now, my data set is yes, that is correct.
I will keep you posted with how that goes. Olivia is already becoming sneaky. She thinks she can pull one over on you at this point.
I watched her in action too. Yeah. I watched her in action too.
Mm-hmm. She'll ask for a cookie or whatever, and you give her a piece, and then all of a sudden she'll be eating it, and then she'll put it somewhere where you can't see it, and then ask for more.
Yeah, of course.
I'm like, hold on, I saw you put that
over there, and I'd take it out. Like she'll put it like in the cup holders of her car seat. I'm like, could I have more? And then, and then she'll be pulling out extra pieces.
Drop that one. Oh, I don't know where it is.
So yeah, she's getting it already.
Yeah, it's quick, man. It's quick.
Working the system.
It is quick. It is quick.
But you have the question of the day for today, so let's hear it.
I do. This stemmed from a couple of client interactions this week. As September rolls around, evals typically pop up on the schedule a little bit more. Lives are, kind of normalizing. Everyone's back in school, back in rhythm. So in almost every one of the evals I had this week, which is probably about 4 or 5, I would say everyone had a very similar specific question. Okay, I understand what's going on now. Thanks for everything. You're giving me all these exercises or ideas to do. How often do I need to do them? And I think that upon reflection, that's probably a question that pops up more than likely at every single initial interaction. So that's the question of the day, Joe. When you are doing an initial evaluation with someone and somebody thanks you for all your services and your wisdom and then states, well, what do I do now? How often do I have to do this? What is your advice to those people?
My advice is to quit their full-time job because they now have a new one.
You're not getting paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's volunteer work now.
Yeah, it's volunteer work.
It really depends on what we're working on and what the response is. So I don't have a clear-cut answer for this. There's a couple ways I think about this. If we find something that makes their pain significantly better, then it is do it as much as physically possible throughout every single day. Because we're just trying to calm down the system. It's nothing that's going to take you a long time. It's usually things that you can do while at work, while picking up your kids from school, while watching TV at night or reading a book. Like you can easily sprinkle in these things. And the only thing that we're trying to do is calm the system. So the more repetition we can do, the more likely it is to keep the pain from coming back to the point from when you came into that first session. Other than that, again, then the exercises really depend on the goal and what we're trying to accomplish and how much work do we need to kind of put into that tissue. Typically, and really the way that I look at it is I usually just ask the person, like, how much time do you have to devote to this stuff?
Totally.
Do you have 5 minutes a day? Do you have 30 minutes twice a week? Like, what do these windows look like? And then we just fit it into that stuff because nothing is puts us in more of an uphill battle than giving them so many things to do that they can't physically do it within their daily life. And then they just don't do it, not consistent. And then it's like a whole snowball effect from there, which gets them hard to get back on track. So it varies individual. I don't know what the low hanging fruit would be. That is also different for people. It really just depends on how they're responding to things. And then am I looking to make any sort of major change for something? If I'm looking for major changes that need to happen, I'm going to ask for more frequency. If we're looking at more, we're just trying to make things a little bit better, we're more maintenance, then those things are going to drop in frequency significantly. So I would say that there's going to be more upfront time-ish commitment. And then as things start to feel better, as things are moving better, then that commitment level certainly will drop off. You don't need to do it at a high level forever, so to speak. So I don't know if it answers your question. I don't know if that makes anyone listening feel like I gave a real answer on that one, but
I think it was a very political answer, Joe. I think it is appreciated, but maybe I'll throw in a little bit more thoughts too, and we can dive into deeper nuances. So initially, I wrote down a couple of things that you said, right? I think priority is what's important for me. And if we start with maybe the acute side of things, right? Because this is where, a couple of people coming in this week, acute pain, really concerned. Hey, you know what? I got a trip next week. I'm really worried about it. I'm in so much pain, but then I do something, I feel a little bit better, and then the pain comes right back. What the hell's going on? How often do I have to do this, right? So I think it really depends on, so if pain is our priority, then I'm going to probably educate people as, hey, pain right now is like an emotion. Let's think about it like your thirst and your hunger. You get thirsty multiple times a day and you keep drinking. You get hungry multiple times a day and you eat. Why do you do those things? Your body gives you a signal. You initiate a behavior and then you try to remedy that signal. So right now we're going to move like you eat. If you think that your pain is going to go away and stay away after just moving once, well, that would be like saying my thirst is going to go away after drinking just 1 cup of water in the morning, or my hunger is going to go away for the day after just having breakfast. It always comes back. And people seem to gravitate to that idea. And it sort of initially makes sense where, okay, I can now see myself, or at least a reason why I'd have to do this multiple times a day. Now, with the pain being in one bucket, if, like you said, we're trying to make range of motion changes, right? Maybe pain isn't as much of a priority or it's kind of settling down, then yeah, I'm going to try to compartmentalize and say, I'd love for you to do this mobility work every day if you can, if there's no barriers, right, in your schedule or things that we really need to acknowledge or worry about. But then I'm going to be ultra specific. I'm going to say, I want you to do this twice a day, but I want you to do it for maybe 60 to 90 seconds twice a day. Do you think that that sounds reasonable? And I'll always kind of throw it back into their court. Like, do you think 2 minutes twice a day sounds reasonable to you? Do you think that's something that you can achieve? And 99 to 100% of the time, people are going to say, well, yeah, that sounds totally reasonable. So then we're off in that kind of range of motion bucket or like the big change bucket, like just try to, think about more behaviors and habits. But then a lot of people will come in and tell me and you, hey, well, I need to get stronger, right? And, my hips are weak, this is weak. Now, whether or not we confirm that in the appointment, pain always, kind of decreases muscle performance a little bit. So people can even feel weak, even if they aren't quote unquote weak. But if then we're going to go back to just general strength and conditioning principles, how often do I train a week? How often do you train a week? Or maybe each body part. Maybe it's 2 times a week, maybe 3 if you have it. Can we do, 2 to 3 sets of something 2 to 3 times a week? Make sure those sets are, pretty challenging. They, work you to a certain rep range. They work you to a certain feeling. And then when we, again, total that up for that specific priority or that quality, hey, do you think it's reasonable to do this 2 or 3 times a week for, maybe when you factor in rest, it's going to cost you 5 or 10 minutes, right? So I think with all this, how often do I have to do it? I always bring it back to, well, what is the first priority on our list that we think is going to help you feel better? If it's pain, hey, look, sorry, you're going to probably have to do this as much as possible. It's going to feel like you are just on the floor doing trunk rotations and cat-cow probably every 20, 30 minutes, right? If it's range of motion, I'm going to break it down into maybe a little bit more chunks within the day. And if it's maybe strength or power or this, I'm going to break it up into a little bit more chunks throughout the week. So what do you think about that in terms of prioritizing, different ideas with people?
I pretty much agree with what you said there. Kind of bringing up the one addition I was saying there is a common thing as we're kind of working through with things with people is that movements we give them can either create soreness or sometimes low level pain. And in those cases, I would also break them apart with a few days, enough time to let the tissues come back to their normal baseline. So whatever that may be 2 days, that may be 1 day, whatever that is. And then you kind of come back into it the next day. And then you're just going to constantly rinse and repeat until that soreness or that low level pain doesn't happen anymore. And then we know that that tissue adaptation started to take place. So that's the other one where, more spaced out based on how things are feeling, because that would be like, we're really challenging the tissue now at this point, and doing something daily can potentially just up that pain response if we're not getting some tissue recovery. So I would want a little break there.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about maybe this kind of build of a question too? People feel like they have to do something at either specific times or specific days during the week, because I haven't gotten the full text of this article yet, but I do have it saved and flagged that a study comparing weekend warriors, right, doing strength training or kind of condensing their training versus people who spread it out, kind of yielded, at least initially at first read through the abstract, not much difference in terms of strength gains or overall improvement. So I think there was this mindset with clients with, well, I could only do this Saturday and Sunday, and that's bad. I know I need a day of rest in between. But now I'm sort of looking forward to reading this article and how they broke this out, because maybe that isn't the case. So thinking about the scheduling and barriers that you mentioned before, if someone's like, Joe, the only time I could do this is Saturday and Sunday morning, are you cool with that? Do you let them roll with that? Or will you say, hey, you know what? Give me 2 minutes on Tuesday. Give me another 3 minutes on Thursday. Give me anything. But is it important to space that out, or are you going to let them roll with that?
I would let them roll with that, as far as having like maybe like a bigger chunk of movement that needs to happen. Maybe that's like a 15-minute routine or whatever it is that they need. But depending on where they are, and I'm a person where it's like, well, if you did that and then your pain doesn't come back and you're feeling better, then we definitely don't need to add anything else, because you're getting, things that need to happen are happening. But I would likely have like this is, we talked about this, I don't know how many times, but I always like to tie some sort of movement that we're trying to improve in as the goal. So then we would have a check and balance. Okay, hey, you did this on Saturday and Sunday, everything's feeling good. If by like Wednesday you realize like movement's moving backwards and you're not moving towards, keeping that kind of goal that we have moving in a direction where the next time we meet, you're going to be in a better place, then we're going to need to take like the 1 or 2 big hitters that make the most change and sprinkle that in throughout the week. And it's pretty, if it's like a 5-minute thing and you really can't find time for it, that to me, it's a priority thing. All right. You're just not prioritizing 5 minutes of movement. You can find a 5-minute gap anywhere to do something. And usually I will try to find a movement that you don't need any equipment for, you don't need to get on the floor for, stuff like that, because this way, when you're like waiting online, you're, doing whatever, like maybe you're working, like, I'm working with someone who's a nurse and, she's at the hospital all day. She can't just get down on the floor. We're going to find things that you can just like go in a empty room and do 1 or 2 things for a couple minutes and then get back to your job. And that's all we need. And that's what I'm going to try to help them kind of figure out, so they can sprinkle a little bit more in. But again, if the Saturday, Sunday stuff is making them feel better and they're not getting any increasing symptoms going back to that, and like, because the last thing you want is like Saturday, Sunday, they feel better. By next Saturday and Sunday, they really need the exercises to do it again. Then you're just kind of going through the cycle of like, I feel bad Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I feel good Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And you're just doing that week over week. You're likely just going to be kind of stuck there. So you're going to have to start to make time for movement other places.
Yeah,
so,
I think
context depending.
Yeah, I think it's always context depending. That's what makes this stuff fun. And that's what we can, talk about 100 different scenarios. I do appreciate what you said though about, people not maybe making the prioritization, right, for 5 minutes a day, right? Like, and you could always find 5 minutes, right? That is like kind of a common mantra. The way I've kind of flipped that conversation with people, right, rather than, maybe kind of having that like, well, hey, like this is kind of your fault, like connotation to it, is this is good, right? If you're telling me that you can't prioritize the 5 minutes at the end of the week, then this probably isn't as bad as you think it is. Because if it was bad, if you were suffering, if you were really unable to do the things that really were important to you, trust me, you'd find time, right? Because they were important. But I think when people initially come in with their story, regardless of it, if it's acute or chronic, right, it is personal to them. It really does affect them. And I think as, human beings, we let emotions sort of get the best of us, right? We all do that. And because we're reacting to those feelings in the moment, maybe the picture we paint is that, wow, my life is in complete shambles. I can't do anything, and I want to fix myself and I want to do this stuff, but I can only do it Saturday and Sunday, right? And then I feel better for the 3-4 days, but I just can't find time anywhere else to do it. I'm like, okay, well, remember we talked about prognosis, right? Maybe it's going to take you 6 to 12 weeks to get this better. For you or for us, we're probably looking more at that 12-week mark, unless you want to try to get a couple more signals in, unless you can try to get a couple more signals in, then maybe we can start to bump that timeline down by a few weeks, just because we're signaling that tissue, you're creating behaviors, you're changing your mindset So if we have, a 12-week course and you're only doing, let's say, 2 inputs a week, that's 24 inputs. And then I compare you to someone who's doing 3 inputs a week. Well, guess what? By 8 weeks, they're already at 24 inputs. So that's more than you at 12 or the same as you at 12, and they did it a month sooner. Do you think they might have an advantage? And then it's like, oh, yeah, because, math just makes sense for a lot of people. So breaking it down that way, I sort of would typically say the same thing. I still do to people when they kind of need a little bit more truth or honesty. It's like, well, you're just not making the time, man. Like I can do cars or an isometric as I'm talking to Avery about her day from school. And she knows my shoulder hurts, so she doesn't question it. But because I'm still able to do both, I can stay engaged with her and do like my shoulder workout. And, with Lily there, I've seen you post on Instagram, like she's in the garage with you sometimes walking around. She's got her little Fisher Price, weight set, right? Make your kids a part of this, right? Everybody talks about kids and childhood obesity and how they're all lazy and they only want to do their iPads and their iPods and this and that. And then we reflect that by limiting our behavior and our gym time and our run time because, we don't have the time. And then we wonder why our kids do it. So bring them into it, right? Trust me, they will have fun. You have to do stuff on the floor. Shit, roll around with them, right? Have them stack cars on you as you're doing a plank, right? Have them put their blocks on you as you're, kind of doing your hip cars or whatever, and try not to make the blocks fall. Like now it's more fun for both of you and you're still kind of getting what you need. So I don't know, like how do we encourage people to make more time? Is there an answer for that? I'm not sure.
No, I mean, that's habit building and, person's desire. But to your point with getting your kids involved, I have a client now and she's, and she's doing great. But she's like, oh yeah, my son's, like doing push-ups with me and like all these things, right? Like, so the kids get involved. They enjoy it. I mean, Liv loves running around the gym and she's like hanging from the bar now. And like, she loves doing stuff like that. So, I think there's a lot of, if you want to get your kids involved in that, I just think having them around and seeing it will make it more likely when they're older to do it. So I want to kind of, be that pillar for Olivia, so to speak. So, but I think, with where things are, another thing that we were kind of going to talk about is like, how long do you need to do them for? And I think that might also help people in this kind of thing. Like when we're talking about like needing to find as like whatever time we can, it's usually in the beginning of rehab. It's because we need to make the changes. Once things start to feel better, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, all that stuff starts to make sense because usually you're working on things that take some time to adapt. You're working hard enough where your tissues can use some rest recovery, and you don't need a whole lot of input at that point to start to make changes. So I think that's also kind of like a way to look at it. Like the beginning, expect slightly more of an upfront, need to do some movement, find ways to fit it into your life, not fit your life into the movements. And then as things go on, you can expect things to kind of get better. But the other thing is, and I think this is important because we talk about when you start to feel good is the time where flare-ups start to happen. How are you treating or how are you having that conversation? Like what happens when someone says they're starting to feel good? What are you telling them? How much do they need to do at that point?
As opposed to, so like they're on a good trajectory. Maybe
they're like
turning
close to discharge. They're feeling pretty good. They're getting back to all the things that they want to do. Like they're 95% recovered at that point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then they have a flare.
No, they don't have a flare at that point. Just knowing that when people feel good, they start pushing their bodies more, flares can happen. I think it's a kind of a nice conversation for us to have, knowing that that's kind of like a common thing that I see. But just in general, if someone's like today, they self-report, they're 95% recovered, they're doing all the things that they want, and then you're giving them a plan of action. Are you just going to like discharge them with some homework and say, do this every day? Like, how are you prescribing things for somebody at that point?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pain sort of diminishing, because most people will list pain as their biggest barrier as to why they're not doing things, or maybe pain is some of the sort of initial reason why we get some of the objective findings that we do, whether that's range of motion on an assessment, whether that's, muscle testing on an assessment, right? Pain will sort of make all of these numbers go down for our clients. So now as pain diminishes, luckily we can go back to those numbers. And for clients and who've been to PT or who've worked with me, we have just sort of like a little standard bout of testing. It might be squatting, it might be push-ups, it might be hanging from a bar, it might be doing a plank, or maybe something a little bit more sports specific for you. It could be a lot of other things. But when your pain, quote unquote, feels better and you're 95%, back at it and you're ready to go again, well, let's go back and revisit some of these tests. Does your range of motion improve? Great. Awesome. What about that strength test that we did? Oh, that's still pretty low compared to someone your age and activity level and desired goals that you want to get back to. So while I'm glad that you feel better, I think that this is still a big piece of your recovery process. I'd still be progressively overloading this single leg squat, this posterior rotator cuff exercise, and I'd keep it in your program 2 to 3 times a week. And you could put it anywhere. I tell them, if they already have a program, if I'm not actually programming for them, like, you could put it in Monday as your warm up. You could put it in Wednesday with your superset of bicep curls. You can put it in as a cool down exercise on Saturday or Sunday if you're going to go for a long Peloton ride or whatever. But I still think this finding or this quality is worth building. And even if it doesn't, prevent you from having pain long term, we still then know you have a better quad, you have a better hip, you have a better back, you have a better shoulder that can tolerate more things. And if it can tolerate more things, then the likelihood of maybe having those flares or pain returning is diminished by, a certain margin. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I do think so. I like that, you're tying it back to something sustainable that makes sense in the assessment and tying it back into that person's goal. That's kind of where it is, right? Like, you want to be able to run without knee pain, but right now you can only run a mile and your knees bother you, but everything else is really good, right? Like, what kind of things can you do? Sure, now it's 2-3 times a week of maybe specific tissue work that's working on things that are missing. You could also intertwine it into sessions or as warm-up. So, like, I like to think of, like, if we're working on running, what kind of things can we do from a movement perspective that's going to prep that tissue for more running? So we can do it right at the start of that, right before you go for a run, things that are going to open up range of motion, things that are going to load the painful area, starting to get into some plyometrics, right? So that your force absorption is starting to happen there. And then you can go in for your run. And then we can use, and one thing I love in these scenarios is now taking the exercises that you're trying to get back to and using them in the rehab environment. So using the pain guidelines, you're trying to get back to running, you're trying to get back to benching, you're trying to get back to deadlifting, and you have this point where after that, your back is so-so. Well, now we're going to start to build up volume, build up intensity, start to load those tissues in those areas where you feel okay, like right on that border of things starting to feel like they're not so good, and letting those tissues adapt with the exercise. So I think that's another way to start to look at it. Like, how do we take these things now? If you're not doing that, there's always going to be a huge gap between the things that we do from a rehab perspective in clinic and the activities that you want to do. And you need to start to use activity in the rehab process in order to close that gap. Otherwise, there's no amount of loading that you can do in the gym that's going to replicate running except for running, right? You have to get specific at some point. There's no mobility drills in the world that's going to, help your body tolerate benching 225 pounds, right? If that's your goal, or that's what you want to get back to, right? You can't load your infraspinatus with an exercise to that degree, right? Or whatever the issue you find is. So that's the only last thing I want to say there is kind of, sure, you have these things, but now we can take the pieces of what you're trying to get to and use them in the rehab process.
Excellent. I think that's a great close. Thank you for your wisdom, Mr. Joe.
Yes. The Friday wisdom that we have coming today, and will be Wednesday wisdom when the podcast is released.
Wednesday wisdom. Maybe that's our new close. Wednesday wisdom.
Wednesday wisdoms. I like it. I like it. Well, Joe, love you. Listeners, love you. And if you made it this far into the episode, extra love for you.